Hey Moonies! I'm Fiona Paulo and I make YouTube videos. If you're new here, then I do a bunch of art-related content such as art commentary, story times, animations, and ranking videos apparently now. We have some important things to cover before getting into this, so if you want to skip all of that and go straight to the ranking, the timestamps are in the description below. If not, and you're happy to listen to some idiot ramble on while you're doing what you're doing, then carry on. When was the last time any of us rewatched Sailor Moon? It just struck me after wrapping up some work on another project that I don't remember sitting down and watching the series properly since like 2010, when we all used to watch episodes in 3 parts on YouTube and part 2 was always missing. Remember those times? My first exposure to Sailor Moon was as a teeny tiny 5-year-old on TV on the weekends. I can't remember what time in the day it aired, but man, that and Cardcaptor Sakura were my first ever exposure to anime, and they definitely left an impression. And if you're watching this video, I'm assuming that was the case for you too. Sometimes it feels nice to revisit a show after such a long time, but it's also a good reality check. We all know Sailor Moon and Cardcaptors had their iffy moments, but we can still acknowledge the shows for what they were. A snapshot of times gone by. Also, I've seen tons of people recently either reviewing or ranking every episode from one of their favourite series, so why not? There are a couple of reasons that I decided to do this, the first being that it has just gone the 30th anniversary of Sailor Moon's first episode airing on TV, so I like to think that this is a timely revisiting of the series. But as well as this, there is another more serious reason, and I will be making a dedicated video regarding this soon. Anyone who frequents the animation side of Twitter may be aware of the hashtag New Deal for Animation, and will have seen some of the frankly very disturbing stories that animators in the industry have been posting about. People have been opening up about how they have been overworked, underpaid, how they have been shortchanged on getting to negotiate wages, how office politics and unrealistic expectations of workload has led to a severe epidemic of burnout, depression, anxiety, and a variety of other physical and mental problems for animation workers everywhere, but most notably in places like New York and Los Angeles, where both the concentration of the work is highest, but so is the competition. Animators in these areas are currently in the middle of negotiations that will hopefully help to reduce the frequency of these kinds of stories, but they can't do it alone, and frankly, I would like to see more art animation YouTubers and commentators speaking on this. This is a massive problem that has been getting progressively worse as animation has become more noticeably mainstream, and since streaming services have taken off. This constant cycle of using people and crushing their dreams for profit is not the way that the industry should be run, and we need to lend our support to these workers who want nothing else but to be able to sustain their livelihoods while working their dream jobs. The year is 2022. We should be able to do this by now. But I digress. For now, I want to use this as an introduction to the topic, for those who maybe don't want to dive into the whole issue right away. Today, we're going to rank every episode from season 1 of the original Sailor Moon animated series from the 90s in order to both highlight and talk about one of my favourite shows of all time that influenced me for most of my life, but also to note some of the changes that have been made within the animation industry in terms of things like recycling clips to save on time, money and labour, the general themes that are now explored, as well as the general attitude towards these kinds of things in general. We will be using the original Japanese dub for this because as much as I want to do the English dub, I have a feeling nostalgia might cloud my judgment, and also because some scenes and episodes were cut from the dub completely. Obviously, there are some things that nostalgia just aren't going to be able to help with, and that's okay. This is a 90s show, so obviously society has progressed a tiny bit since then. Not a lot, just a tiny bit. Probably doesn't feel that way right now with everything that's going on. It's worth noting though that the trend of trying to squeeze as much work out of an exhausted crew as possible is not a new thing, and considering this season has 46 episodes compared to the typical 10 to 15 episodes of today's standards on platforms like Netflix, it's no surprise that many of these methods were adopted, as there's a high chance that these kinds of backbreaking working conditions were employed during Sailor Moon's production as well. Just because I want to go into some of the techniques used to save time and effort doesn't mean that the workers weren't being rinsed in other ways back then. If this ends up being well received, I will continue to do rankings of all the other seasons too, including Sailor Moon Crystal. So before we get into the actual ranking and analysis of the series, make yourself a hot beverage, grab a snack, and let's delve into a bit of background surrounding the season and the way in which it's structured. Let's talk about Sailor Moon. So Sailor Moon, the anime, is obviously an adaptation of the manga Bishoujo Senshi Sailor Moon, published in December 1991, and created by the artist Naoko Takeuchi. This series follows Usagi Tsukino as she and her friends transform into magical soldiers to fight off evil forces and race against them to locate the legendary Silver Crystal, and by extension, the missing Moon Princess. 3 guesses who that ends up being. The anime for the most part is faithful to the manga, but there were a few key differences in how the characters behaved, as well as the story's pacing in order to adapt to a TV style style schedule. Because of the nature of 90s cartoons at the time both in the East and the West, the series follows a Monster of the Week style formula, meaning that most episodes could stand on their own so that kids wouldn't get as confused as to what was happening during TV reruns. The stories were episodic and kept very simple. Usagi and friends set up the beginning with a specific topic or interest, the bad guys will take advantage of said interest for their own gains, and Sailor Moon then steps in to save the day, returning things to the original status quo. This was also done a lot with manga adaptations especially, because it would allow the manga to continue its story if it was still ongoing. As for the character behaviours, well, it's no secret that, especially 20 to 30 years ago, most higher-ups in the animation industry were men, and having male writers trying to depict a female teenage friendship resulted in characters like Rei being much more catty and mean to Usagi than in the manga. I'll be honest and say that I actually didn't really like Rei as a kid because she reminded me of one of my school bullies because of this characterization. This issue seems to have gotten better with time, but in Japan, while there have been some improvements, things don't seem to be changing quite as quickly as they are in the West, which is something we should have on our radar. The series is also split pretty evenly between plot episodes and filler. Season 1 has a total of 46 episodes in all, with around 25 plot episodes and 21 filler. This meant that plot episodes could still be aired in their respective blocks, and the filler could be used as buffers while the story progressed off-screen and on the pages. Back when TV still reigned and we didn't have streaming services, this was an extremely smart way of doing it because it also increased the rewatch value of the show as opposed to someone being able to just sit down and binge the whole thing in one sitting. But, you know, things change, and filler episodes are now a lot fewer and far between, which is sometimes a relief because after watching certain episodes 100 times over, they do start to get on your nerves. But at the same time, this is also something that has caused more strain for animators because now, instead of having the time to write out the rest of the story, sometimes the storyboarders are being expected to do this, which is not their job. Nevertheless, Sailor Moon ended up being a gigantic success both in and out of Japan to the point where it is now widely recognised as a cultural phenomenon. Sailor Moon is referred to as the godmother of the magical girl genre and brought forth a huge shift in how both people perceived and consumed anime and manga geared towards girls. Ask any person who has had the tiniest exposure to anime or internet culture in general who this character is, and they will be able to tell you. It's honestly so admirable how this one cute story about a group of friends garnered this huge reputation and cult following. But does the original season hold up to this? Let's find out. So this goes without saying, but all of these rankings are my own personal opinion. Please don't scream at me in the comments if I give one of your favourite episodes a low ranking. Just tell me in the comments that you like it and maybe tell me why, and it might change my mind, I don't know. Alright, episode 1. Crybaby Usagi's Magnificent Transformation. Normal girl Usagi meets Luna the cat and transforms into Sailor Moon. She is then given her first mission to rescue her friend Naru from a strange monster. So a thing you'll notice with the Japanese episode titles is they give away the plot of the episode. So we're just going to provide the titles, a short summary, and get straight into the thoughts and comments for each episode because there are far too many to get too in depth with them. All episodes will be ranked from 1 being the lowest and 10 being the highest. So this episode does a good job of setting up Usagi as a character. She's a normal girl with a normal life and normal family and friends who's a bit ditzy and kind of a crybaby. And this tracks really well with anyone who knows the franchise, and it stays consistent pretty much throughout the entire series. I wish we'd had some exposition of the Moon Kingdom and also of Luna for context at the beginning, because we never really get much of an explanation as to why Luna talks beforehand, or are given any inkling as to why we should really care. It does, however, do a good job of introducing all of the key players at the beginning of the series. Usagi, Luna, Mamoru, Jadeite, Queen Beryl, Tuxedo Mask, and the Yoma monsters that will be prevalent for every single episode. Animation-wise, I think it's cool how they economized some of the animation with blurred frames rather than doing breakdowns or in-betweens. Instead, they just blurred from one keyframe to the next, which indicates to me that they were trying to save their budget and time for the more important scenes and episodes. It's also very good at setting up the villain's motives. The Dark Kingdom's Queen Beryl employs Jadeite to send out Yoma monsters to collect human energy. For what purpose, we don't know yet, but it is only the first episode, so we have plenty of time to piece things together. Overall, for a first episode, it does its job marvellously, so I'm gonna give it an 8 out of 10. Episode 2. Punish them! The House of Fortune is the Monster Mansion. Usagi's friend Umino and many other boys in her class fall victim to the Yoma's influence, causing them to behave like delinquents. If there's one thing that Sailor Moon is known for, it's the really good use of colours in its backdrops. They give the series this kind of unique pastel look that I've never really seen replicated in many other anime. To be honest, this isn't one of my favourite episodes, especially with the skirt flipping scene. Basically, under the Yoma's power, Umino talks back to their teacher and flips her skirt up, but the episode does have a purpose. Usagi has two regular friends in school in the first season called Naru and Umino. The first one dealt with Naru, whose mother is a jeweler being a target for the bad guys, and now this one has Umino, who is this kind of nerdy overachiever with a crush on Usagi, as the main victim. This also made me laugh, but Tuxedo was there for all of like 2 seconds, and then he was like, poof, gone. I remember reading somewhere that Tuxedo was originally made to be a parody of those supportive sidekicks who don't actually do anything, and it definitely feels that way in some of the episodes. Overall, this episode helps to establish the status quo. Beryl and Jadeite discuss their next scheme, the monster of the week is shown exacting that scheme, Sailor Moon realizes what's happening and challenges them, they fight, Sailor Moon appears cornered, Tuxedo Mask appears to offer encouragement without actually doing anything, and then Sailor Moon saves the day. Foolproof. Overall though, 5 out of 10. The skirt flipping brought it down quite a bit. Episode 3. Mysterious sleeping illness. Protect the girls' hearts in love. Girls all over Tokyo are falling prey to a mysterious illness that causes them to fall asleep with no way to wake them up. At the same time, Naru and Usagi are listening to a radio show that takes place at midnight which reads out love letters submitted by listeners. Whoever's letter is read on the air receives a flower brooch as a prize. In this episode, Sailor Moon meets Jadeite for the first time, which is really cool. They spend a decent amount of time figuring out the evil plan in this one too. In a few episodes, there isn't as much lead up to figuring out the plan, which can sometimes be a bit frustrating to those who enjoy watching the characters solve the mystery, because sometimes it's just like, Eureka! Let's go here, even though they have no idea where they're going. But we do get introduced to the disguise pen, which allows Usagi to change into various forms, and I gotta say, I love some of the forms Usagi takes because they actually switch it up with her hairstyle especially, and they also make her taller, make her shorter, and she actually looks like someone else. There's also some really cool use of tiara action in this one, and actual fighting, which is great, since I think it sometimes gets forgotten that Usagi can fight when she needs to. Overall, 7 out of 10. So this is where I'm going to drop a small tidbit about the 3-episode rule. Anyone who watches any show will know of this rule, but it's referenced the most in anime, in which you need to give a series at least 3 episodes to set up its narrative in order to fully grab your attention. Personally, as an animator and story writer, I don't like this rule unless under very specific circumstances, like for example the tonal shift that takes place exactly halfway through BoJack Horseman Season 1. I don't think you should have to suffer through 3 episodes of a show you're not into, because that's really stupid. The reason I'm bringing this up for Sailor Moon is because all 3 of the first episodes have done a really good job of keeping its momentum going. The first one sets everything up, the second keeps the momentum and sets the pace for the typical formula done throughout the season, and episode 3 introduces a new mechanic with the disguise pen. They're small things, but they add up just enough to keep you wondering what's going to be revealed in the next episode. Speaking of which, episode 4. Learn to be skinny with Usagi. Usagi gains weight, so she and her friends go to the gym. Forget everything I just said about the 3-episode rule, because this just ruins it. 2 out of 10. I don't like this one. This is an episode that really dates the series for me. It is just so fat-shamey and unnecessary, and it really tears down that narrative of girls supporting girls in Sailor Moon, especially when they're conversing with their chubbier classmate. It also just has some really unnecessary fan service thrown in too. There are 2 scenes of Usagi in a bath, which just feels weird to watch when you are aware of the fact that she's 14, and then at one point Luna knocks her over and there's just this random crotch shot, which again, this is supposed to be a 14-year-old girl. I get that she's not real, but it still doesn't make it any less weird. I would give it a 1 out of 10, but unfortunately, the production value of the episode is objectively consistent with the rest of the series, so it felt fair to at least give it that, I guess. The episode is a standard one of the series, it just happens to involve a subject matter that I personally don't agree with. Episode 5. Scent of a Monster. Chanela will steal your love. Usagi and her brother Shingo have a disagreement about keeping Luna as a pet because he doesn't like cats, so instead he finds a different pet that just so happens to be part of the Yoma's plan. First off, the parents are weirdly chill about their children just getting these random pets, and this is coming from someone who domesticated their neighbours' cats to come over every day so that my mum doesn't get lonely when me and my dad are at work, but whatever. We also get our first mention of the Moon Princess in this episode, which is really nice. Usagi also receives a new function to her tiara, which sadly is only used a couple of times early in the season but never gets brought back up, which is a shame. And I know this because when going back through my notes, I couldn't even remember the name of it because I hadn't written it down. And if I hadn't written about it being a function, I probably would have forgotten about it altogether. Overall, this episode doesn't really do much. It's nice to see Usagi interacting with her family, which is so rare for anime these days because most protagonists are either orphans or semi-orphans, but nothing really changes in it. The family were already keeping Luna as a pet, and Shingo is too infrequent of a character to really put a wrench in that. So yeah, overall a 6 out of 10. Enjoyable, but not all that memorable. Episode 6. Protect the Melody of Love. Usagi plays Cupid. A jazz musician has the tape that he recorded for the woman he's in love with swapped by a Yoma with the intent to broadcast it and control all of Tokyo. And Usagi not only has to stop the tape being played on air, but also help these two hapless adults find love. This is a really sweet episode, though I do find it strange that two teen girls in the 90s would be willingly listening to jazz music, but then again, it is Japan, and I don't know what the music scene was like back then. Something I also like about Sailor Moon is that while yes, it romanticizes love and relationships a lot, which causes it to be a product of its time, it was inclusive when it came to that love, which meant that it didn't just focus on relationships in Usagi's age group, for example. Usagi was helping a grown man confess to the woman he loves in this episode, and I couldn't help but find it really endearing. People of all ages and backgrounds deserve love, and this is even emphasized with two of the evil generals later on, and without even mentioning Haruka and Michiru, who sadly don't appear in this season. The fighting in this episode was also very smart, and Luna got to be part of the action as well, which is good. Overall, 8 out of 10. I found this one to be a lot of fun. Episode 7. Usagi learns her lesson. Becoming a star is hard work. The Yoma mind controls civilians into taking part in a talent contest, which Usagi also intends to join after being inspired by a rising star from her school, who is also under the Yoma's control as the judge. So this one actually unlocked a memory for me. I tried putting makeup on my brother after watching this episode and my dad yelled at me. But aside from that, this wasn't one of my favourites because, I don't know, I've come to dread episodes that include popularity contests just from sheer secondhand embarrassment. I did, however, find it really adorable that they tried to sing the main theme song from the opening. This episode was also quite humanizing in terms of Usagi's position as Sailor Moon. She can't have a normal life anymore as a Sailor Senshi because she is now duty-bound to protect people. She can't chase her own ambitions or commit to other paths in life because of this predetermined destiny, and Usagi is shown to be upset by this, and rightly so. I like this episode a lot for that reason, but my overall ranking is 4 out of 10, purely because aside from that tidbit, I wasn't really finding it all that engaging. Sorry guys. Episode 8. The Girl Genius is a Monster. The Brainwashing Cram School of Horror. This episode focuses on a new character, Mizuno Ami, who is shown to be exceptionally smart and studious. Usagi befriends Ami, but Luna notices that something feels off and assumes she might be a monster. It's only when it's revealed that the Yoma are using Ami's cram school to gather energy that she is actually revealed to be Sailor Mercury. So this one is a biggie for obvious reasons. We now have another Senshi in the mix besides Sailor Moon, and who better to introduce first than Ami? She's honestly such a great character, and she's really good with helping out to balance Usagi's more exuberant personality with something a bit more reserved but kind who helps keep her in check but doesn't harshly chastise her. In turn, Usagi helps Ami to come out of her shell a bit, which really helps make them a great duo to start off the beginning of the team's formation. There are also some really good comedy beats in this episode. The banter between Sailor Moon and the Yoma especially was quite funny, and we also get a glimpse into what Luna does behind the scenes. It's revealed that Luna uses the arcade that Usagi frequents as a base of operations, which is a nice nod to the manga, in which she actually has a secret base rather than just using one of the arcade screens as a computer. Overall, 8 out of 10. Good episode. Very good episode. Episode 9. Usagi's Disaster. Beware of the Clock of Confusion. Usagi and Ami go shopping and find a clock that looks like Luna. Usagi wasn't able to buy it, but her mother got it anyway later on. But the clocks from the shop emit a strange power that cause Usagi and other people to rush around as if they don't have enough time in the day, therefore expending more energy for the Dark Kingdom to seize. So first off, it's very cute to see Ami and Usagi hanging out, but one thing that dawned on me when watching this one is that now that we have Sailor Mercury, we probably aren't going to get as many lightbulb moments from Sailor Moon because she isn't on her own anymore, and therefore doesn't have to think on her feet as much because Mercury is so smart. This kind of left me with a weird feeling because Usagi is already seen as an underestimated crybaby, which is what made it all the more rewarding when she did finally manage to take on bad guys using her own wits. But that said, this episode was still surprising because Tuxedo Mask was actually useful, goddamn. I also liked one design tidbit in this episode where in the darkness, Luna's crescent moon actually looks like it glows in the dark, which I thought was really cool. Overall, this is a pretty standard filler episode. I will admit that it didn't really keep my attention too much. I thought with Sailor Mercury it would have been a bit more interesting than it was, but unfortunately no, so 6 out of 10. Episode 10. The Cursed Bus. Enter Mars, the Guardian of Fire. Several people who have taken a bus near the Hikawa Shrine have gone missing, so it's up to Ami and Usagi to investigate. While doing so, they meet the Shrine Maiden Reihino, who seems to have a very keen spiritual sense. So another milestone episode which introduced another member of the Senshi to the fray, but in all honesty, I wish we'd gotten just one more episode of just Ami and Usagi for the sake of situational variety between the two. This introduction of Sailor Mars felt like it came on a bit too soon. Not only that, it felt like Rei herself accepted her role as Sailor Mars and the situation of fighting monsters far too quickly, but in that sense she is a shrine maiden, so I don't know, maybe she's so used to warning off bad spirits at this point that something like this probably doesn't faze her. But even still, I would have liked a slightly bigger reaction and fallout from it. She seems very chill about the whole thing, considering she's supposed to be the guardian of fire and passion. I also just found it endlessly hilarious that Tuxedo Mask just popped out of one of the buses that had been transported to another dimension after all of the conflict had been resolved. He's an emotional support sidekick. Overall, 6 out of 10. The placement of this episode feels like it could have been delayed a bit, and I've always found it a bit difficult to understand Rei's characterization in the show outside of her teasing and arguing with Usagi. Sorry, Rei stans. Episode 11, Usagi vs. Rei, Nightmare in Dreamland. The gang go to an amusement park in which several people have gone missing, but Usagi and Rei have a hard time getting along enough to be able to focus on their mission. So in a lot of episodes, the opening shot will be of the Dark Kingdom, in which Jadeite will explain his newest scheme to both gather energy and eliminate the Sailor Senshi to Queen Beryl, who will give him her approval. In this one though, it's shown that Beryl is becoming irritated with Jadeite's continuous failures, and we see Jadeite start to show signs of being under real pressure because of this. I think this is a good way to maintain conflict on both sides in order to maintain the audience's intrigue. You almost want Jadeite to get a win under his belt just from this scene alone because it keeps things interesting. As for the Senshis, the gang are split into 2 groups, with Luna and Ami in one and Usagi and Rei in the other, and this really helps to show the latter of the two as 2 sides of the same coin. In a lot of ways, Usagi and Rei are very similar. Their emotions change on a dime, they get into harebrained schemes, but the way they react is different. Rei is offensive, often being very confrontational and abrasive, while Usagi is defensive, often breaking down and crying as a defense mechanism, which is what causes their personalities to clash a bit. Also, I found this Yoma to be quite interesting and unique, and definitely on the creepy side, which is pretty cool. I think this is my favourite Yoma design so far. Overall, 4 out of 10, a decent episode, but they threw in a random panty shot, which threw me for a loop and also kind of annoyed me. It's kind of hard sometimes to remember that anime shows are not crafted with the same sensibilities as Western cartoons, and even though this show is very cute and bubbly and follows a certain formula, stating that it's a kids show is a bit short-sighted. And it's also the reason that those kinds of scenes and even whole episodes were cut for international releases, despite the fact that this then creates quite a noticeable dissonance with fans who seek to watch the original Japanese dub later in life. It's the same thing that happened with shows like Yu-Gi-Oh! These kinds of measures were put in place to protect children, despite the fact that these kinds of shows were made for a slightly older demographic. They were never intended to just be for kids, we just decided that because the West doesn't consider animation to be a serious art form. Episode 12, I Want a Boyfriend. The luxury cruise ship is a trap. Jadeite accepts help from a favoured Yoma of Queen Beryl, who entices couples on a luxury cruise ship as a scheme to collect energy. Rei miraculously scores 2 tickets but refuses to take Usagi and instead asks Ami to come with her, causing Usagi to sneak aboard using the disguise pen. So in this episode, we really see Rei's catty side as she outright denies Usagi's request to come aboard despite her being the one to try and win the tickets first. I understand that this is because Rei doesn't see Usagi as competent enough for the mission, and this both helps to establish Rei as someone who wants to take missions seriously, but also just kind of portrays her as a huge bitch. I'm sorry, Mars stans, but you're probably seeing a bit of a bias from me leaking out as the season progresses. I do start to like Rei a bit more later on, but in the beginning she was very abrasive when it came to Usagi, and it's a bit upsetting to honestly see because, as I said, she reminds me of an old school bully. And again, as I said in the episode following Mercury's introduction, this is starting to develop into Usagi not being taken seriously by the other Senshi, which never actually occurs in the manga. The girls might comment on Usagi crying a lot and things like that, but they don't ever actually doubt her abilities as Sailor Moon, which is something the anime falls short on. In terms of animation, I think this one was probably a bit lower on the budget priorities because they had this dialogue scene with Jedi explaining their plan while his head was just in the corner looking like an NPC. Graphic design is my passion, but overall, 3 out of 10. I wasn't really fussed on this one. Episode 13, Girls Unite, The End of Jedi. Queen Beryl has finally had enough of Jadeite's failures and threatens to doom him to eternal sleep if he doesn't destroy the Sailor Senshi. Jadeite projects himself into the Tokyo night sky and challenges the group to a battle at the airport. The one thing that I will praise is that the general public are taking the matter quite seriously. School children were being warned not to go, and the police were investigating. Normally with this kind of stuff in older shows, the general public's reactions are more or less overlooked, so this is nice to see because it communicates to us that the show understands that its background characters aren't mindless. Usagi understandably doesn't want to go because she's taking in the severity of it all and is afraid, and even goes to seek advice from Motoki about whether she is in the right regarding this, considering everyone else around her seems to be taking the situation a lot more lightly. Motoki is one of the side characters who works in the arcade introduced in the first episode and whom Usagi has a crush on, which helps to juxtapose him with Mamoru. So someone Usagi considers to be quite rude and that she doesn't like as much. I didn't mention him much during episode 1 because he's much more of a side character, but I like that they do this because it's a nice little red herring for first time watchers, but I'm also not a fan of the way that they sometimes have Usagi seek validation for her insecurities through Motoki from time to time. Not because it's inaccurate, this is very much a thing that teenage girls do towards guys they like, but as we've said before, this is definitely a product of the show's time in that a lot of the characters' motivations are in the hope of attracting the opposite gender. And this seems to be an odd theme throughout the episode because when we get to the battle between the Senshi and Jadeite, he starts to run with this extremely petty and misogynistic dialogue that just kind of comes out of nowhere. Jadeite obviously held disdain for the Senshi, but it was framed as being because they were, you know, the enemy and not because they were women. Jadeite has never shown this kind of thinking towards someone like Queen Beryl, for example. It almost feels like a very left field thing because they needed another reason to make him unredeemable before he died. Overall, 5 out of 10. I like some aspects, but it also felt very disjointed in certain places. Episode 14. A new enemy appears, Nephrite's evil crest. Jadeite failed one too many times and is killed. F in the chat. Oh dear, who could have saw this coming? And he is now replaced with Nephrite. Nephrite switches up tactics towards going after individuals and turning them into monsters at their most powerful, as opposed to attacking groups, and targets a young tennis player. So right off the bat, Jadeite suffered the clear-cut consequences of failure, and we not only get introduced to one new general, but we also get an appearance from another one too, which helps to keep the threat level high, since it just feels like they keep on coming. Not only that, but switching up the ways that the monsters appear helps to keep the episodes feeling a bit fresher for longer, especially because it means that we will be able to become more invested in each character who falls victim to Nephrite's plans. I really do love the visuals done for Nephrite's sequence where he scouts out his victims, and it's a pleasant little nod to both the Sailor Senshi and astrology, which obviously utilizes the planets they each represent. It's a good way of tying the villains into the whole universe theme instead of just having them be random Earth monsters. I also like how Tuxedo Mask actually fights, which is a welcome thing, and the choreography in general for this one is pretty good. Overall, 7 out of 10. I liked it. It was a good episode for moving the season onto its next phase, but I will admit I'm not a big fan of tennis, so it got a point knocked off. Episode 15. Usagi's Panic. Rei's first date. Rei decides to pursue Mamoru as a love interest. Meanwhile, an older man working as the gardener for a local park who is a friend of Ami becomes Nephrite's next victim, and he becomes enraged that the humans take advantage of nature. So I said this about episode 6, but I really do enjoy when older characters are also given a few minutes in the spotlight, just because it helps to give a bit more variety. It also shows that anyone can fall victim to something. There were a lot of comedic elements in this one, especially with Rei trying so desperately to slink her way into Mamoru's life as his girlfriend. And not only that, Usagi then remarks that the student guidebook states that fraternization with college students is prohibited, as if she isn't going after Motoki, who's revealed later on to be the same age. Like, come on girl. Dissonance. But overall, this one is 6 out of 10. If for whatever reason it seems like I've given an episode some good feedback, but then gave it a mid or low score, just assume there was like an unnecessary pants shot somewhere. But as well as that, this episode just was kind of a standard filler episode really. There wasn't much going on. Episode 16. A Girl's Dream. Usagi becomes a bride. Nephrite's next victim is Usagi's home economics teacher who is due to be married and wants to sew her own wedding dress. Meanwhile, there is a handmade wedding dress competition that both Usagi and her teacher enter. So first off, Usagi is an absolute icon for envisioning herself with 2 husbands. Get it, girl. I love that for her. Aside from that, the episode was definitely a lot more involved with the girls' antics rather than the main plot of the episode, which I find quite enjoyable, and it's a good change of pace. The Yoma reveal and resolution, unfortunately, as a result, was very, very rushed, and I mean like the last 3 minutes of the episode kind of rushed. And honestly, it felt more or less like it didn't really even need to be in there, to be honest. Rei and Usagi's harebrained schemes with trying to enter the contest were pretty hilarious, but I'm not gonna lie, I wish Ami could have her own scheme at some point. She doesn't have to be prim and sensible all the time, come on, let her be feral. Let Mercury be feral. But yeah, this was a cute episode with some good comedic elements, but like the previous one, 6 out of 10. Episode 17. Usagi's a model. The flash of the monster camera. Nephrite targets a young award-winning photographer who goes to a nearby school to Usagi and Ami. Nephrite's influence causes him to want to photograph girls, leading to a modelling opportunity that Usagi and others try out for. So I am not a fan of episodes that deal exclusively with looks, because they personally annoy me a lot. Most of these characters, especially in anime, are drawn to look attractive, so trying to get us to believe that Usagi isn't pretty enough to be a model just really doesn't work well. It was the same with the episode dealing with weight loss. Are we really going to believe that this rendition of Usagi is fat? really? But hey, I guess that's just the 90s for you. But an interesting thing I did notice with this episode that made me think about the series as a whole is that there really aren't as many wild hairstyles or colours as you would come to expect in a typical anime of today. Probably the most anime hairstyle we get comes much later with Chibiusa and the Amazon Quartet, and that's really it, and none of those appear in season 1. That's not a major point, but I thought it was interesting since we're talking about a looks-based episode, and the victim for this Yoma just made me think of it because of how wild his hair is. Overall, 3 out of 10. I did not care for this one aside from that. Episode 18, Shingo's Love. The Grieving Doll. A girl in Shingo's class wins a doll making competition and gives the doll to Shingo as a gift, but he rejects her due to peer pressure and the doll is broken by accident as a result. Nephrite then uses her as his next victim. Now, one thing that was cool to see and helps differentiate Nephrite from Jedi is that he actually talks back and defies Beryl when he speaks, and this is a really good way to both set up tension within the Dark Kingdom's dynamics, as well as a good bit of foreshadowing for what's to come of Nephrite later on. Something I love about Usagi as a character with family members is that despite the fact that they fight a lot, Usagi and Shingo can be kind to each other and he still feels comfortable enough to confide in his sister about what happened to the doll. I also thought this was a really nice episode that explores the way in which boys in particular are mocked for indulging in so-called girly things, and even then, at least in the subtitles, I don't know exactly what was said because I don't speak Japanese, his classmates are more teasing him for liking a girl rather than liking a doll. And I don't know, in the grand scheme of things that probably doesn't seem like a major point, but it adds to this kind of consistent nature with Sailor Moon in which men are not shamed for being associated with things that are traditionally feminine. I also really liked how creepy the doll is, purely because it seems even more so in the 90s animation style. I had a brief period of time in my life where I got really into the creepy doll aesthetic side of anime with series like Rose and Maiden, and this to me was like another layer of nostalgia on the cake of my childhood. This one is a 7 out of 10. The theme was good, but the Yoma design for this one was kinda lame. You could have made her even a tiny bit more monstrous, like come on. Episode 19. Usagi's Joy. A love letter from Tuxedo Mask. All over Tokyo, girls are receiving love letters from Tuxedo Mask, asking them to meet him. Usagi wants to go, but is warned it's a trap, but Naru actually goes, and it's revealed that this was a setup by Nephrite to trick Sailor Moon. So this episode in itself is interesting because you have a bunch of existing elements being reinforced, and then you also have events introduced which then take on a greater role in the story as the season progresses. When Naru goes to meet the fake Tuxedo Mask who is actually Nephrite, he is the person she was hoping he would be, because she has a crush on Nephrite's human identity, and this sets the precedent for one of Sailor Moon's more complicated and problematic aspects that we will get more into later on. Speaking of Nephrite, I appreciated how they kept the astrology theme with his attacks and manifested the Leo star sign to attack Sailor Moon. That was pretty cool. In this episode as well, we are also finally shown that Mamoru is Tuxedo Mask, even though it's pretty damn obvious from the first episode, but I digress. It also gives us an explanation as to why Tuxedo Mask always appears when Sailor Moon is in the middle of a battle. It's because when she transforms, so does he, and it gives us our first glimpse into the connection that the two have. And this is further emphasized when Tuxedo tells Sailor Moon that he feels like he knew her a long time ago. We are at the point in the series where we are finally inching towards Sailor Moon and Tuxedo Mask's beginnings, and it is exciting to go through again. I honestly can't explain it. So instead, I will give it a respectable 9 out of 10 and leave it at that. Episode 20. The Summer, Beach, Youth, and Ghosts. Usagi, Ami, Rei, and Luna take a vacation while masking it as training, but the hotel they stay at is haunted by a mysterious force. So following the last episode, this seems like a bit of a random one, but at the same time, I think it's also a pretty good palate cleanser. We got a lot of stuff in the last episode, so I think this one is a good one to follow it. It's just the quintessential compulsory anime beach episode, which also manages to combine Halloween in there too. 2 birds with 1 stone, I guess. The most hilarious thing about this episode is that the hotel has this like weird spooky gimmick, but the staff who are a ghost, a werewolf, and a Frankenstein are all just normal people, and they are just as terrified of everything and prone to crying as Usagi. Basically, the hotel is being haunted by a real ghost, which is actually the manifestation of a young girl called Sakiko's psychic power who resides there, and the power is brought on by the negative influence her father has, who is trying to get her to control her abilities, even though she doesn't even really want to use them. It's a cute episode. We see Ami finally putting her homework down and have fun at Usagi's request, and my god, the queen strikes again with her fantasies of having 2 dudes at her beck and call. And another thing that I appreciate is that this time the monster wasn't a Yoma created by the Dark Kingdom, it was just some young girl who was sick of being told what to do, and it was entirely separate from the Senshi's current dealings, which implies a broader scope of the types of encounters the Senshi could face in future episodes, and I think that was a very smart move. Overall, 7 out of 10. It was only a filler episode, but I found it really enjoyable and out of the box. Good job. Episode 21. Protect the Children's Dreams. Friendship through anime. An animator working on the upcoming Sailor V movie falls victim to one of Nephrite's plots, and is consumed with jealousy over her friend's skills. It's up to the Sailor Senshi to bring her back around. So the first thing I want to note about this one is that there is a lot more character establishment than what we've seen so far when it comes to the guest characters. And damn, did I find this one relatable. I'm not gonna lie and say I don't get jealous of my fellow art peeps. I get jealous quite a lot. And most often it comes from an innocent place of looking up to them and wanting to be like them. But the thing about jealousy is that as much as it probably stings to hear, it is a you problem, and you can do two things with it. You can stew in it and let your negative emotions warp the way you view the object of said jealousy, who most of the time is just a random ass person who doesn't even know what's going on. Or you can use that feeling as motivation to better yourself. I don't want to be the kind of person who gets bitter about other people's successes. I want to lift them up and learn from them. And for that reason, this episode really speaks to me, especially as an animator. Don't be petty, be inspired. On a lighter note, if anyone was in the Steven Universe fandom in the mid-2010s, you may remember people comparing this character to Rebecca Sugar, and yeah, it really does look like her. Something that I also thought was cool is how they slightly repurposed the Senshi's attack animations for the villains. Recycling. We love to see it. This one is a 9 out of 10. Good character development, relatable plotline, good message. The only thing that brought the score down is how the animators were very chill about having a few high school girls in the studio without making them sign some kind of secrecy contract, considered they are the exact demographic for the film they're working on. That was my only issue. Episode 22, Romance Under the Moon, Usagi's First Kiss. A princess from the Kingdom of Diamonds is visiting Japan in order to showcase a valuable treasure of her family. Usagi and friends wonder if this may be the Moon Princess and the silver crystal they've been looking for and decide to attend. So we're getting a bit more of an inkling as to the princess and the silver crystal, and even Tuxedo Mask attends this gala. Both he and Usagi seem to be slowly piecing together who they are, and it's been a long time coming. But don't get too excited, because almost everything we are shown is still cast in shadows, and nothing new is really brought to light in this episode, which is a shame. We do, however, get another appearance from the third Dark Kingdom General Zoisite, and finally get a glimpse of the fourth and final General Kunzite. And from this appearance alone, we can hazard a guess that Nephrite's chapter is soon coming to a close. But aside from that, however, there were a couple of dubious aspects of this episode, like the fact that Usagi mistakes alcoholic drinks for juice and afterwards is kissed by Tuxedo Mask, which, no, don't do that. Don't come on to people when they're under the influence, especially when they're underage, please. It's framed as romantic since at this point we already know they're gonna end up together, but no. The next couple of episodes I think are the ones that exemplify some of Sailor Moon's problems in this area, and you know, I understand that some of it is a difference of culture, but in a general lens, it's still in kind of bad taste. I do, however, like that Princess D isn't this typically beautiful lady and instead just looks like Umino in a dress. That was a really cute twist. Overall, 6 out of 10. We get teased about the plot and it's a very nice fluff episode, but for me it felt very much like a filler in disguise. Episode 23, Wish Upon a Star, Naru's First Love. Naru has become infatuated with Nephrite's human identity and is becoming susceptible to be used by him. Meanwhile, Zoisite and Kunzite send a Yoma to steal the black crystal from Nephrite for their own gain. Usagi tries to talk some sense into Naru, but it doesn't do any good until Sailor Moon steps in and reveals the truth. So this episode can be considered a two-parter with the next one just for reference. Now, this episode I think is the one where we really start to see the issue with Sailor Moon's general romanticization of love. While yes, it doesn't discriminate and allows for many different forms of love to be represented, such as the perceived relationship between Zoisite and Kunzite, and also in later seasons Haruka and Michiru, we also end up with instances like this where a teenage girl is convinced she's in love with an older man, and I feel like I shouldn't have to explain that Naru is essentially being groomed here. While in this episode it is most definitely portrayed a lot more negatively, and characters like Usagi are shown to be concerned for Naru's safety, as they should be, at the end of it, this doesn't get resolved and put to bed like it should be, and the relationship actually develops further when she defends Nephrite from Sailor Moon's attack. This isn't just Sailor Moon, bear in mind. A lot of people take issue with Japan's stance on age gap relationships and consent laws at large when depicted in media. It is a byproduct of a much larger issue that can't really be tackled alone by any singular group just screaming about how wrong it is. It's going to take a lot more than that, and it's unfortunately going to take a lot more time too. Overall, 4 out of 10. The episode had a good leg to stand on at first, but then the plot doubled down and it really lost its way. And I am just saying that in relation to the plot, the animation in general has been pretty standard throughout the entire series. Episode 24, Naru's Tears, Nephrite dies for love. Zoisite decides to use Nephrite's newly developed feelings for Naru against him and kidnaps her. He demands the black crystal be handed over in exchange for her safety. So after the last episode, the romantic subplot between Naru, who again is 14 years old, and Nephrite is strengthened. Nephrite previously defended Naru from the Yoma that Zoisite sent out, and now he's shown reinforcing those feelings when Zoisite sends out 3 more Yoma to kidnap Naru and attack Nephrite when he comes to rescue her. Problematic age gap aside, I found it very surprising that Nephrite was willing to switch sides, but then this does kind of bring attention to the divergence of the anime and the manga, because in the manga, the 4 Dark Kingdom generals are shown to have previously been generals of the Earth Kingdom. It really bugs me because this episode's progression is really good, and I am a massive sucker for cheesy romantic plotlines. The scene where he dies and they are just talking is done quite well. I just wish she wasn't a teenager, or at the least switch up the generals' ages to lessen the age gap since she is so young. Actually, I just had a look at this. Naoko Takeuchi mentioned that Zoisite is 16 to 17, which would have been a much better age to go for. Jedi is 18, Nephrite is 19, and Kunzite, is around 25 to 26, which I did not realize, so apply everything I'm saying to Naru and Nephrite to Zoisite and Kunzite now too. I did not know that their age gap was even bigger, god damn it. This isn't supposed to be Studio fucking Clamp. I'm too angry to keep talking about this one. 5 out of 10. Decent plot, decent progression, I just wish it didn't involve this kind of relationship. Episode 25. Jupiter, the powerful girl in love. After Nephrite's death, Zoisite and Kunzite are now put in charge of bringing down the Sailor Senshi. Queen Beryl tells them of the legendary Yoma who are trapped within 7 rainbow crystals and are living their lives as normal humans. Meanwhile, a tall new girl comes to Usagi's school who is both tougher than the guys and also a hopeless romantic. Oh thank god, the best girl is here to help us forget about the last couple of episodes. So with a new general or generals taking the helm, we get another switch up in the villain mechanics. With Zoisite, we have a definitive number of 7 episodes in which all of the rainbow crystals will be located and the black crystal has been repurposed in order to respond to them. And not only that, some of these rainbow crystal holders will be a bit closer in connection to our main cast of Senshi. Okay, so now let's talk about Makoto. I feel like they did everything right with her intro. She was shown as tall and intimidating, but she uses this for good when she roughs up a couple of guys who are giving Usagi trouble. And then we get to see her sweet side as well when Usagi approaches her and they eat lunch together. It's no secret that she's my fave Senshi, is it? And I swear it's not just because she's green, come to think of it. I might like the colour green because of her, who knows. But yeah, after she becomes acquainted with Usagi, we are then introduced to the next driving conflict in the episode. So every rainbow crystal holder will have a different ability. Sometimes we're shown what it is, sometimes we're not. And this guy is revealed to have telekinesis and uses it to win all of the prizes in a crane game. And then the cherry on top to tie all of this together is that Mako develops a crush on this guy because he looks like her older senpai. Cheesy, I know, but for Sailor Moon it works, and this does an excellent job of tying everything together. And as if that wasn't enough, Sailor Moon receives her most iconic weapon, the Moonstick, in this episode as well. There is so much that happens. I haven't even mentioned the fact that Queen Metalia has been awoken by Beryl, but they have brought most things together in such a way that I would actually suggest this episode to be one of the season's best, and as the best example of a Senshi's introduction. 10 out of 10, I love this episode, and I think all the points I just described are the reason why Jupiter also happens to be a fan favourite. They just did everything right with her and I'm so happy about that. Episode 26. Restore Naru's smile. Usagi's friendship. Naru has been missing school due to still being affected by Nephrite's death, so Usagi and Umino decide to take her out to cheer her up. In this episode, we see that Naru still probably has a lot of residual feelings and, also presumably trauma from what happened with Nephrite, and I really appreciate that we came back to her after having had a small break from that side of things. I thought the way in which she was grieving felt quite natural, but I can also say that by the end, she seemed to be moving on a bit quickly considering all of this was affecting her to the point she was missing school. I also thought it was cute that they put Naru and Umino together, even though personally I don't think Naru needs another guy in her life right now, but whatever. At least this one is the same age. I think I mentioned this before, but I do find it quite sad that they made it so that the other Senshi don't really put much stock into Usagi's leadership, even though they all thought her to be perfectly competent in the manga. But at the same time, this version is probably a bit more realistic considering they all haven't known each other for that long. Also, this episode's humor was a twist. A priest turning into a boxer? I mean, hey, everyone has hobbies. There was also an Easter egg in the graveyard where one of the headstones lists the name of Mamoru Furikawa, known professionally as Joe Hisaishi. This is the guy who produced soundtracks for a number of well-known films like Spirited Away and Princess Mononoke. The more you know. Overall, 7 out of 10. Good episode, but, not amazing. Episode 27. Crushing on Ami. The boy who can see the future. Ami is knocked off the #1 spot in the exam scores at school, and the one who beat her is a boy who was later revealed to be the holder of the next rainbow crystal with the ability to see the future, as well as having a crush on Ami. So first of all, I've been skimping out on the one-shot characters' names purely because having a new character every episode means that there are too many names to keep up with and it gets way too confusing, but this character is called Ryo Uwara, and I think he deserves to have his name attached because the interesting thing about Uwara is that he is extremely aware of what is happening, which is refreshing refreshing, because almost all of our previous victims have felt like plot devices, whereas Uwara actually feels like a character. The attempt to take away the rainbow crystal goes awry, and we get to see some character interaction between him and Ami, to which it is really nice to see, because it impacts him later on as the Yoma. But I also gotta laugh, because he reveals that he can see the future to her and informs Mercury that he knows who she is, and she tries to counter this, and I'm just like, girl, you're good, but you're not see the future good, let the guy have this. But when we come back to the Yoma side of things, we see that Uwara is fighting against this and actually turns against Zoisite, which I don't recall we've seen yet from a monster. And it was a really good way to set up that the humans are still there when the Yoma is released, but the manipulation caused by the Dark Kingdom hypnotizes them. One thing that did kind of throw me in this episode is we get a scene of Mamoru and Rei walking along, and I don't know if it's just me not paying attention, but I keep forgetting that those two are a couple because they never really do anything with it except implant a few irrelevant scenes like this from time to time for what feels like no reason other than to pad out the episodes. Like, I wouldn't mind if they were maybe walking along where the Yoma attack was happening, but no, Mars and Jupiter just appear when Moon and Mercury are cornered. 7 out of 10. I think Uwara is one of my favourite side characters, and Ami's romance plots always tend to be pretty good, which I appreciate. Episode 28, The Painting of Love. Usagi and Mamoru get closer. Usagi and Mamoru are asked to model for a painting by a reclusive artist whose gallery exhibition they were attending with friends, but the paintings depict various characters and instances that invoke feelings and clues as to their past lives. So in this one we get a bit more of a picture surrounding Mamoru and Usagi's connection. It's sweet to see them interacting more naturally as opposed to just petty bickering on a random street, so I do like that side of things. I also liked this episode's character, who is this super sweet but shy artist who, just by painting what she does, kind of gives us an inkling that potentially anyone who has a connection to the Senshi, Dark Kingdom, or anything else can experience visions or dreams that hint to their past lives or experiences. Speaking of which, this is one of my favourite monster designs as well. She just looks really cool, and I also like that they aren't immediately associating Tuxedo Mask with the Senshi, because at this stage, it is realistic to believe that they could be enemies. As much as Sailor Moon and probably Tuxedo himself want to work together, they are both after the same thing but don't fully understand the significance of it or why they want it, and therefore can't just collate their forces. 6 out of 10. Good episode. Good episode. Episode 29. Total Chaos. The Messy Love Rectangle. Makoto has now developed a crush on Motoki, and she and Usagi decide to still try and pursue him, despite the fact that he already has a girlfriend. This girlfriend, however, is shown to be the next rainbow crystal holder. So, first off, Makoto is smooth with getting that number and inviting herself over to Motoki's place, like damn. And we actually get a bit more context as to what he's like outside of interacting with the girls and working at the arcade. It's nice to see, and I appreciate that out of most of the other goddamn characters his age in this show, he expresses to Mamoru that he's not interested in dating high schoolers while he's in college and instead sees them as kid sisters. Thank you, Motoki, for not being a creep. I like that this also comically makes Mamoru think about his relationship with Rei. Another thing is that he doesn't try to stop his girlfriend from going to study in Africa and actually gets really excited about what she's researching, and it's just so cute. This guy is too good for the people around him. Aside from that, there's not much else to say regarding this, aside from the fact that we see a bit of Zoisite and Kunzite together, which now, after knowing their ages, I'm just gonna gloss over. This one is a 7 out of 10. Episode 30. Grandpa loses control. Rei is in danger. Rei's grandfather is attacked by Zoisite in pursuit of the next rainbow crystal, but he is able to fend him off. Meanwhile, the shrine takes on a new apprentice, but exposure to the black crystal causes Grandpa Hino to act strangely. So this episode breaks the mold a bit by having the conflict appear right off the bat, and not only that, it's someone close to the soldiers in Rei's grandpa, which really helps to hook the audience. Honestly, I really love Rei's grandpa. He's goofy and is fun to have on screen. I also like that they get more into Rei and Usagi's friendship. It was nice to explore the ways in which Rei expresses her emotions and the way that this time really affected Usagi into wanting to make it up to her. Compared to at first, when this relationship seemed a bit rocky, now that they've explained it a bit better, I'm on board with it a lot more. I wasn't really the biggest fan of shoehorning another guy into the mix though. Like Rei said, she has Mamoru, which, you know, come to think of it, we do have to constantly be reminded about that, because they haven't actually shown them doing much together except walk around for the past couple of times it's been brought up. I think love triangles were probably a much more accepted plot device in the 90s, but at this point, they're just seen as really overused and annoying. Gee, if only there was an example of a franchise I could use that drove the concept of love triangles and rectangles into the dirt to the point where no one who watched that franchise wants to deal with one of them for many years to come. I feel this new character was originally intended to be used as a red herring for the gang, but it really didn't work, so now we have another side character introduced for practically no reason. Doesn't help that the titles ruined the plot of the story to begin with anyway. I feel like this episode would have worked way better if the reveal of the crystal holder being Rei's grandpa was shown after the introduction of the Shrine Apprentice. 6 out of 10. Episode 31, Love and Chased, Luna's Worst Day. Luna is being chased by a horde of cats in a turf war, but is rescued by an admirer, who happens to be a large fat cat called Rhett Butler, who is also the final holder of one of the rainbow crystals. This is by far the funniest episode of the season. All of the comedy beats in it are fantastic, and I love that at one point Luna and Butler fall into the sewers, and to save on frames they mimic the effect of slow motion by instead doing it like snapshots. I thought that was really efficient and clever and just plain hilarious. Zoisite was also equally funny in this, especially when it came to the sewers, and just, I can't describe this scene, I need you to watch it. I don't know why it is so hilarious to watch a formidable and serious villain be consumed by an ocean of rats. The humour for this one being a cat instead of a human was also interesting, and a lazy fat cat at that, which I think influenced the humour's personality a lot. It just plain wasn't interested in fighting, and in fact rescued Luna, which just, aw, it's so cute. This also happens to be the last rainbow crystal, so we'll have to see what happens after this, because the Dark Kingdom, the Senshi, and Tuxedo Mask all have their own now, so it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. 9 out of 10. This was hilarious, and it was a good way to cap off the rainbow crystal collecting saga. Episode 32. Umino's resolve. I'll protect Naru. Umino decides to ask Usagi for advice on getting Naru to like him back, but Usagi's advice basically amounts to trying to get him to behave like Tuxedo Mask, which Umino obviously misinterprets, and so he starts to adopt the persona Jesus. No, Tuxedo Umino Mask. So, despite the summary, the episode starts off with an interesting revelation. Luna's computer in the arcade reveals that all 5 Senshi will be gathered together soon, so she tells the Senshi at the shrine and explains that she is from the moon, and that they will need to wake up and remember their past lives soon. We also get a scene of the generals deciding that their next move is to try and get the other crystals by force. I thought it was a good thing that they targeted Naru again. Well, that in itself isn't a good thing, but she is now viewed as a main target when it comes to the Dark Kingdom to twist Sailor Moon's arm, and so it was a smart callback. And I thought it was adorable that they also tied that into Zoisite believing Umino was Tuxedo Mask and backing off. The Yoma was a bit of a cop-out though, I feel. It would have been cooler if it was Umino that got turned, which would have been really interesting to see the characters navigate. Overall, 6 out of 10, I'll be honest, I switched off from this one a bit. The episode was cute, and I quite like Umino and Naru together, but from a modern and, also gay standpoint, pairing every boy and girl together is just really boring and predictable at this point. Episode 33. Enter Venus, the last Sailor Guardian. A fake Sailor Moon is fighting crime all over Tokyo and draws the attention of the Senshi and Tuxedo Mask. The fake Sailor Moon is revealed to be Zoisite, who badly wounds Tuxedo, but he is saved by the appearance of the final Senshi, Sailor Venus. She's here! The final Sailor Soldier who has literally been teased since episode 1. In the series timeline, Sailor Venus has been using the alias Sailor V long before Usagi even came into the picture, so it is frankly way overdue that we finally get to meet her. And I have to say, even though she is key to this episode's resolution, I still felt she was a bit too understated for someone who has had so much build up to her reveal up to this point. I mean, the girl was having an animated movie done of her and you just threw her in towards the end? I don't know, that feels like a bit of an injustice. But that said, I think it was a good episode for setting other things in motion, like Mamoru being injured and also for the Senshi to figure out their next steps, as well as for setting up Kunzai as the next main general that they will be facing. For an episode that feels very pivotal to the plot, I feel like it could have had a bit more impact, a bit more oomph, you know what I mean? 6 out of 10. Just needed more oomph, just needed more. Episode 34. The Shining Silver Crystal. The Moon Princess appears. Upon arriving home injured, Mamoru is challenged by Zoisite to duel for the rainbow crystals. Usagi notices that Mamoru is not good and inadvertently gets caught up in the situation. So we get a pretty relevant scene of the Dark Kingdom where Beryl specifically instructs the generals not to kill Tuxedo Mask and bring him in alive under Queen Metalia's orders. This not only throws another wrench into Beryl and Metalia's motives, but it also sets up a conflict of interest for the generals who subsequently go behind her back and attack him anyway. That said, Mamoru doesn't exactly make things difficult for them. You'd think someone as smart as a college student would know how to dress a wound and not walk around with a bleeding shoulder, and would also not be so gullible as to think that the bad guys would honour a fair fight. I understand the urgency of the situation and all that, but come on man, you don't want to bleed out before you even get to the battle. I do however like the sequence and effects used to show Kunzite's powers, and this really plays into showing just how much of a threat he is. And this also causes Sailor Moon to reveal her identity to save both herself and Mamoru, and it is so good to finally see that reveal, and I think it was done really well. I gotta say, they could have given Tuxedo's transformation a bit more, but saying that, this is the only time we get to see it throughout the series. We do see a different one earlier than this, but it isn't quite the same. Just, I don't know, I kind of wish we'd been given a proper one with a bit more care put into it so that they could use it as a stock transformation if they wanted to. But that said, I'm not a part of the production, so I don't know, maybe they just weren't able to for whatever reason. And to top this all off, we're finally shown, despite being spoiled by the opening sequence, that Usagi is the Moon Princess, and it was a lovely scene, both in the way the crystals shot off towards her, and also the way her dress changed, but honestly, the reactions to everything going on are a bit lackluster, and even more so with regards to Tuxedo Mask being gravely injured. And I'm speaking in regards to the Sailor Senshi in this instance, not Usagi herself. She obviously showed quite a lot of reaction to this. A lot of the episode's later frames were sweeping headshots to show the different characters' facial expressions without there actually being much in the way of emotions to show, especially Ray. Like, girl, your boyfriend has just been revealed to be a superhero and is presumably lying dead in your friend's arms. Maybe show a bit more. Overall, I think this was a very good episode, but it was things like this that kind of docked points for me. 7 out of 10. Episode 35, Returning Memories, Usagi and Mamoru's Past. All is revealed. Usagi and Mamoru now remember their lives as Princess Serenity of the Moon Kingdom and Prince Endymion of the Earth Kingdom. Mamoru is kidnapped by the Dark Kingdom as the others escape, and Luna and Artemis finally explain the events of everyone's past. First off, not gonna lie, I wish they had waited until the more standard sequence of the moonstick combined with the silver crystal had been used before introducing that weird little jingle that plays alongside it. It is just really unfitting for the situation at hand in the story currently and takes away from the severity of the events. So now that everyone is up to speed, we can imagine that this has hit everyone pretty damn hard, especially Usagi. In fact, it hits her to the point where she doesn't even want to be Sailor Moon anymore and is understandably shaken. Usagi's feelings towards fighting feel very real and understandable. She keeps seeing friends, loved ones, innocent people being attacked and hurt, and on top of that, she has just been flooded with memories of herself and the love of her life being killed, so it's no wonder she wouldn't want to continue. But I will say, this is the one instance that I will agree with Mars having to be harsh with her. Whether or not people think the slap was warranted, they are cartoon characters, remember, but it's a sobering moment because as opposed to the previous episode, we finally see Rei expressing her feelings and being upset at the situation, especially in regards to Mamoru, and you really feel for her and what she's going through. Not just Usagi. This episode also marks the end of Zoisite, and I think it was a fitting end for him to be killed by Queen Beryl, but man, it was kind of underwhelming and I wish it had been a bit more impactful. We do also see the way in which Kunzite cares for Zoisite, and even though I now don't particularly agree with the relationship, a lot of the time villain characters are depicted as being cold and callous towards even their own comrades, so seeing that Kunzite does genuinely care for him is a nice touch. 8 out of 10. I'm glad that they went back and let the characters process their emotions about the situation a bit more, and this also helps to generate buzz for the next phase of the season now that Zoisite is out of the picture. Episode 36. Usagi's Confusion. Is Tuxedo Mask evil? Usagi is extremely depressed from recent events, so Venus, aka Minako, goes to cheer her up. They decide to visit a new hair salon which is revealed to be set up by the Dark Kingdom to identify and trap Sailor Moon. Tuxedo Mask also returns, but he has been manipulated by the Dark Kingdom into believing that Sailor Moon is the enemy. So yeah, even though there were a lot of revelations from the past, things still aren't going to be easy for the gang from here on out, since the Dark Kingdom are still going to be trying to attack them. The other Senshi are shown trying to figure out their next move while trying to account for Usagi's predicament. We are also shown that Tuxedo Mask's memories are being manipulated by the Dark Kingdom, and he and Kunzite are being made to work together, which is a very good but tricky dynamic. It's good because it means that the threat level is high and creates real stakes for the Senshi, but also tricky because Kunzite openly does not like Endymion because of what happened to Zoisite, and vice versa. Endymion doesn't seem to be very fond of Kunzite either. One thing that I thought was a really nice touch was that the DNA match triggered for Minako in the Monsters Salon is a good callback to the fact that in the manga, Venus is meant to be a body double for Princess Serenity in a way, which also happens to be why Usagi and Minako look so similar. In fairness though, this isn't an episode I particularly enjoyed, and I can't really seem to place why. Maybe I wasn't feeling well when I watched it, but 5 out of 10. Episode 37. Let's Become a Princess. Usagi's bizarre training. Usagi enrolls in a princess seminar hosted by a British aristocrat known as Countess Rose in order to learn how to fill her role as a proper princess so that she can utilise the silver crystal to its full extent. The princess seminar, however, is shown to be another one of the Dark Kingdom's schemes to ensnare the princess. A fun little tidbit to start off with is that it is revealed that Artemis was the one giving Luna orders through the computer, which was quite funny and adorable. The princess plotline itself is cute, but I gotta laugh every single time they introduced like a British aristocrat in anime because our aristocrats are very famously racist and classist towards even people from their own country, FYI. If you were born on the wrong side of England, say goodbye to the idea of being viewed as a person. I'm just now noticing the way in which I talk about and approach that concept is probably because a lot of things were more readily accepted and idealized 30 years ago, but now these things have kind of been soured a lot for people, and that includes things like aristocracy. These days, when talking about those kinds of topics, there is a lot more awareness and often cynicism involved, which I think is an interesting thing to note. It's cool to see the conflict of interest between the villains, they just really don't want to work together, and it shows in how they even readily express this to Queen Beryl. This one's a 5 out of 10. It was cute, there were a lot of sweet moments, but secondhand embarrassment and rich people just kind of killed this one for me, not gonna lie. Episode 38. The Snow, the Mountains, Friendship, and Monsters. The gang see an advertisement for a skiing contest called the Moon Princess Contest at the Moonlight Course Skiing Resort and decide to take part. But the contest has been sabotaged by Kunzite as a way to capture Sailor Moon. Gotta love the designated sport episodes, a relic of the age of TV. Totally Spies, Witch, Fairy Odd Parents. So many shows picked skiing in particular too, which is interesting. I wonder why that is. Maybe it was a sneaky way to get people interested in trying these things out? Whatever the reason is, they were such a staple and you just don't really get many of them anymore. Like, the beach episode is still a thing in anime, but I don't know, it doesn't seem to be as prominent in the West, and I kinda wish it still was. The monster costume is hilariously creative. Snowman bra and shoulder pad combo. I can think of a few friends who would wear that, and I don't think any of them are women. I also like that they still go out of their way and show that Kunzite and Endymion are having different ideas for how to deal with the Senshi. And finally, we get Usagi and Rei together just on their own since episode 11 and being actual friends without being overtly mean to each other, and I like it a lot. I do honestly love Usagi and Rei's interactions when they are actually speaking to each other as people and not in this weird kind of rival, argumentative dynamic. Overall, 7 out of 10. Not amazing, but quite decent with good character interactions. Episode 39. Paired with a monster, Mako, the ice skating queen. The girls are watching a figure skating team on TV, and Luna and Artemis remark that ice skating was the most popular sport on the moon, with Princess Serenity being especially good at it. When they go to try it out, however, the best skater of the crew happens to be Makoto, who is seduced by the male counterpart of the skating team who are under Kunzite's control. So figure skating was the most popular sport on the moon, and this tracks with the fact that Takeuchi actually based the Sailor Senshi outfits off of figure skating outfits, which is a really nifty tidbit. We appreciate Mako showing the men how it's done here, lifting a man into the air despite it having never been done apparently. No problem for our girl. Also, I found it very surprising when Tuxedo Mask appeared to help the Senshi out during their battle with the Oma. It shows that both Endymion and Kunzite's opposing views run quite deep, and also despite the fact that he is being manipulated, he still has his morals for how he wants to go about doing things. Personally, I find it a bit flip-floppy for my liking, but for others, it can be quite engaging and I respect that. It was also cool that Sailor Moon's costume gave her skates, even if she wasn't all that good at the sport. Overall, 6 out of 10. Even though I liked it, it was still very much filler, and after nearly 40 of these episodes, I just want to get to the good stuff by now if I'm being honest. Episode 40. The legendary Lake Yokai, the bond of Usagi's family. Usagi and her family take a trip to a hot springs resort where there is a lake that is said to hold a legendary monster. Queen Beryl instructs Endymion to investigate this lake as it appears to hold a large amount of energy. While there, Usagi and Endymion meet while Usagi plays the melody from his old pendant. We literally have not seen anything of Usagi's family since like episode 22, and it's so easy because of that to forget that she actually has one sometimes. Something that sets Usagi apart from other protagonists is that she's allowed to be a kid and to be rambunctious and all of these things, and even despite that, we are seeing her grow more mature as she realises her position as the series continues, but is still allowed to have those traits and to be loud and a coward and a crybaby sometimes, and that really is something to be commended. We get a scene where Endymion and Usagi talk while the pendant plays, and he confirms that he doesn't recognise the name Mamoru, but is still drawn to the feeling that the melody gives him, and I just think that this is a really sweet scene and helps to establish Endymion's conflict between the Dark Kingdom chattering in his ear versus his own instincts. His humanity is still in there, and it gives us hope that Usagi can free him soon. The monster shown in this episode is another that breaks the mold similar to episode 20. Endymion summons this monster and it attacks the Skino family, but is never actually confirmed confirmed if the monster is affiliated with the Dark Kingdom, and this probably coincides with the fact that the events in this episode never occurred in the manga. One thing that kind of bugged me is that the Senshi just appeared. Like, obviously they must have followed Usagi after she told them they were going, but I would have liked an additional inkling that they were on their way just to link everything up. Overall, 7 out of 10. Episode 41, I Won't Run Away From Love Anymore. Ami vs Mamoru. Queen Beryl orders Endymion to capture the 7 previous Rainbow Crystal holders in order to create one super powerful Yoma. Uwara warns Ami about the Dark Kingdom's plan, and she faces off with Endymion to protect him. In this episode, the Dark Kingdom are attempting to repurpose past Yoma, and I think this is not only a good callback, but also a good way of not having to create more one-episode characters. It's also good that Kunzite questioned if Endymion should be the one to do the task, considering the Rainbow Crystals was an event that Zoisite took precedence over. It's really sweet that Uwara managed to warn Ami about what was happening, and it makes me appreciate him even more as a character when he actually faces Endymion and manages to outsmart him for a moment. And then Mercury also got the chance to do this by smashing the Black Crystal, which I very much appreciate. It's great that they gave the other Senshi a chance to fight without Sailor Moon, even for a little while as she and Rei kept watch over Grandpa Hino, though I do wish that they could be given the ability to repel monsters more without her having to be the one who does it every time with the Moonstick. Overall, a good episode, but I'm not gonna lie, Uwara is a criminally underutilized character who has a lot of potential, and I don't think we really see him much after this, which is a shame, so 7 out of 10. Episode 42, Sailor Venus's Past, Minako's Tragic Love. The gang are busy at work trying to find the entrance to the Dark Kingdom in order to try and rescue Mamoru. Meanwhile, the Dark Kingdom are doing their own research and have found an old acquaintance of Sailor V who is the next Yoma victim. 9 episodes after her introduction, we finally get a bit more background on Minako as a character, which is really long overdue. I understand there are a lot of characters and that they also need to account for the plot, but come on. Since she was finally introduced to Sailor Venus, she's just been more or less a backdrop, which really isn't fair to her. We get a reappearance from the disguise pen, which we have not seen for a little while. I don't know if it was a badly translated pun or what for Usagi to turn into a sailor and pilot a boat, but it was a cute way to use the pen. So we learn in this episode that Minako spent some time working with Scotland Yard in London. Always Scotland Yard, always London, but whatever. The Yoma of the Week was someone who became good friends with Minako, but eventually they end up falling for the same boy. When an incident results in Sailor V seemingly dying, she sees both the boy she likes and her ex-crime partner together and realizes that they fell for each other, and decides to head back to Japan without letting them know that she's alive. During the final showdown, Sailor Moon is all too happy to attack the Yoma, but Minako begs her to save her friend. But Sailor Moon is like really defensive about doing that, since this woman took Minako's crush from her. It's nice to know that the biggest discretion in the Sailor Moon universe isn't trying to kill someone as a monster or anything like that, but stealing someone's man. That's the one true crime. The ending to this episode is really bittersweet. Minako is a surprisingly tragic character, and I wish we had more of this kind of development early on from her. Only getting it so close to the end of the season kind of makes me feel like we were slightly robbed, but nevertheless, I did really enjoy this one, so 8 out of 10. Episode 43, Usagi Abandoned, The Falling Out of the Sailor Guardians. The Dark Kingdom become aware of a rift taking place between the Sailor Senshi, which is actually a plan devised by Sailor Moon to get the Dark Kingdom to let her join them so that she can rescue Endymion. So honestly, I am so happy that we get to have a smart plan from Usagi after so long. She's more or less been relegated to being the clueless frontrunner since the other Senshi came on the scene, as I thought she would, which is why episodes like this make me so happy, because they're a nice nod to the fact that yes, Usagi is clumsy and childish, but she does have some brains and good ideas that make her capable of being a leader. It helps to paint her as dependable despite her flaws. It's also incredibly sweet to see that when Kunzite and the Yoma catch on to the facade, the Senshi try their best to put their faith in Sailor Moon, but they reach a point where they just can't stand by anymore seeing her being hurt and jump in to help their friend. This is something we've kind of needed for a while because it helps to finally establish that even though they came together through strenuous circumstances, they've really gelled together and make a great set of friends as well as a remarkable team. 8 out of 10. This was probably the best episode they could have given us in the run-up to the finale, and I'm very grateful for it. Episode 44, Usagi's Awakening. A message from the distant past. The Sailor Guardians have finally found a way to get to the Dark Kingdom, but are met by Kunzite, who tries to stop them by sending them to a random point in time, but is thwarted by the Silver Crystal, which takes them to the ruined Moon Kingdom, where they learn everything that happened in their past lives. I found it kind of random to just have a black hole in a building, which is the thing that they have been looking for this whole time. Could have at least given it some pizzazz somehow. Like, maybe it could have reacted and opened to the Silver Crystal somehow? I don't know. I will admit though, that was a cool way to get some exposition of the Moon Kingdom, having an attack from the villain backfire. In the manga, they literally just have Luna transport everyone to the moon instead. Speaking of Luna and Artemis, they actually managed to keep going and discover that the base of the Dark Kingdom is in the North Pole. We finally meet Queen Serenity, Usagi's mother from her past life, who refers to herself as an incarnation of Selene, the moon goddess. And we finally get an explanation as to what Queen Beryl and Metalia want with her. And it's a very interesting angle that in the flashback, Endymion implies that Beryl is brainwashed as well, though he probably meant more in the sense that she's blinded by her own pursuit of power. Beryl wanted Endymion for herself, which is probably why she didn't want the generals to kill him. Queen Serenity uses the silver crystal and sacrificed her life to seal away the Dark Kingdom and to subject all those affected by the war to a kind of reincarnation. And this is where things pick up for Usagi and others in the present day. Even though it isn't explicitly stated that this is how things will go, we see the consequences to both sides of what this conflict could bring. Either the Earth will be destroyed and consumed by Metalia and Beryl, just like the Moon Kingdom, or Usagi will be doomed to sacrifice herself to stop them, just like her mother. It's a very polarizing conundrum. I also appreciate that after all of this, the Senshi return and Usagi is now more willing to face Kunzai head-on and actually manages to defeat him, and this is a great hallmark for how much she has grown from the scared kid we saw in episode 1. She now has something to fight for and protect, and it's lovely to see. 9 out of 10. For this one, I really enjoyed it. Oh, well, we're almost at the end. 2 more to go. Episode 45, Death of the Sailor Guardians, the tragic final battle. Queen Metalia is soon to be revived, and this is reflected in a rise of natural disasters around the world. So the Sailor Senshi teleport to Point D in the North Pole to stop the Dark Kingdom before it's too late. So this is the episode in which they show that the Senshi can transport like in the manga, so even though it's not the same place for the same reason, I'm glad they kept it in. Almost as soon as they arrive there, they are confronted by a group of Yoma called the DD Girls. These Yoma create illusions of loved ones such as Tuxedo Mask being tortured, and Usagi falls for it twice. Teenagers can be so easily tricked, huh? It's a shame really, because we've been shown that Usagi is able to see past some things, but for plot reasons, they always feel the need to dumb her down, and it's kind of exhausting. One by one, the Senshi are taken down by one of the DD girls, of whom one is taken out by each Senshi in turn, and it is heartbreaking watching them go. Jupiter goes first, then Mercury, then Venus, and the saddest one of all is Mars. And as much as I moaned about her in the beginning, it is touching to see how far both she and Usagi have come in terms of their friendship, and that makes it all the more upsetting when she dies. I'm also very glad that they didn't have the deaths be ambiguous. The Senshi did die, and it adds so much more to the stakes on Sailor Moon's end. We also get to see that Endymion's conversion to the dark side has been completed, which also gives us something else to look towards. This one on its own is a tragic one that helps us to dash the audience's hopes of the Senshi facing off against Beryl together, and it also does a good job of setting up the pins to be finally knocked down in the final episode. I give this one an overall 8 out of 10. Episode 46. Usagi's Eternal Wish, a brand new life. Sailor Moon is transported to the Dark Kingdom to face off against Queen Beryl and a brainwashed Endymion. I really hate the Japanese titles sometimes. Kinda kills the suspense a bit when you get spoiled on what's about to happen, but I have to say, as far as TV finales go, it delivered on what it needed to for a first season. I can be sympathetic to its shortcomings. I have 2 big criticisms though for this finale. My first one is that I wish Queen Beryl had put up more of a fight. Endymion was out for blood when fighting Sailor Moon, and she took several painful hits. Just as he was about to deliver the final strike, she finally fought back and then played the melody from his pendant that returned his memories, and he turned to attack Beryl and she took 1 rose to the chest before crying to Metalia. My second criticism is that I am severely disappointed with the final showdown, purely because it felt like Metalia was the vessel rather than Beryl, and it made me feel like Metalia didn't even really need to be involved in the series in any capacity. They legitimately could have cut Metalia from the show, and Beryl could have saved all that energy for herself, and this series of events would have played out the exact same way. It was just pointless. I mean, what? She didn't even have a physical form or anything that could have given her a physical presence that presented her as anything other than a whispering deviant who wasn't capable of doing anything herself, which is why she needed Beryl. But whatever. Beryl becomes all-powerful, Sailor Moon stands up to her, and the ghosts of the Senshi help Princess Serenity to defeat her by harnessing the power of the Silver Crystal, causing a grand reset in which the world is reverted to the way things were before the Dark Kingdom awoke, and no one remembers the events that occurred, nor being Sailor Senshi. I'm kind of half and half on the Great Reset resolution. On one hand, it allows the series to be repeated if you so wish, Futurama style, but then it's also just unnecessary in a way, you know, especially considering the Senshi never lose their memories in the manga, which creates this weird situation in which they need to go through the whole discovering your Senshi thing again in season 2. I would have understood it a bit more if they didn't know whether or not a season 2 was going to be greenlit, but season 2 episode 1 was literally previewed at the end of this episode, so I don't understand why this was needed. But all in all, with that in mind, I think this was the best they could have done in terms of wrapping wrapping the series up, and despite my criticisms, I'm still madly in love with it. So with all my comments in mind, I will give this final episode a 7 out of 10. And there we have it! Every episode of Sailor Moon Season 1. I am so tired. Despite the fact that I was dumb and gave myself a stupid as hell deadline to shoot for, I should really stop giving myself deadlines in general. I seem to work faster that way anyway. Getting to watch this show again was a real treat, and I'm really glad that I did. There were some odd directional choices, there were some divergences from the manga, there were some problematic ships, but even with all of its flaws, this show helped to mold the minds of a generation of children, and I think it gave us something special. If I was to give Season 1 a ranking overall, after tallying up the scores for each episode, I determined this season overall to be a solid 7 out of 10. Some people might disagree, and that's fine. There were parts I looked too much into and not enough. I have biases from both being a Sailor Moon fan, but also not a huge watcher of anime, and there are a lot of factors that go into these kinds of things, so my personal ranking isn't obviously going to please everybody. But dang, if you have made it this far, thank you so much for watching. This has been my longest and most labor-intensive video yet, so if you have made it this far, then please like and subscribe, and send this to any hardcore Sailor Moon fans who you think might enjoy it. What's your favourite episode of Sailor Moon Season 1? Let me know in the comments below. It'll be interesting to see whose favourites I absolutely roasted, and it'll also be pretty funny to see myself get roasted. I'm gonna go and cry in relief that this monster of a video was done, and again, I will be posting a video soon in relation to the new deal for animation, as well as my thoughts and comments on Disney and Pixar's most recent escapades. So if you're excited for that, then keep your eyes peeled. And if you're interested in Sailor Moon and want to take part in a creative project full of really cool people, I recommend the Sailor Moon Hearts and Ice Reanimated. Go and check it out. Stay safe everyone, and I will see you soon. Bye!